We are in chapter 12, and a very important part of chapter 12, page 52, if you're looking in the actual book, the Tanya book. Otherwise, I'll pop it onto the screen shortly. So why is this such an important part of the conversation? Because we've been talking about the Beinoni. This is the chapter dedicated to introducing the Beinoni to us. So we've spoken about what a tzaddik is, and we've spoken about what a rasha is, and we've debunked essentially both of our preconceptions about those those two categories of people. We suddenly realize that a tzaddik is an incredibly unique human being. We also realize that a rasha might be a lot closer to home than we would have wanted to believe. And now we started to talk about a Beinoni, and we said that the Beinoni is a person who has tremendous spiritual fluctuations during the course of the day, because when a Beinoni is in a state of meditative prayer, then the Beinoni has an experience which is similar to the experience of a tzaddik, where Hashem is so tangible and so real and so accessible that it is unthinkable that the Beinoni would think, do, or say not only differently to what Hashem wants, but they wouldn't even entertain the possibility. That's the radical state that the Beinoni is in during the course of the prayers. Now we're at the part of the chapter that says, after he closes the book, after he closes the Siddur, what happens next? Now we all know from our own experience, that sometimes after we close the Siddur, or after we walk out of shul, it's like somebody erases our memories. Whatever happened in shul, as inspiring as it was, as insightful as it was, as meaningful as it was, we have this amnesia as soon as we walk out. By the way, have you ever had that experience where you walk into a room and then you have absolutely no idea why you walked into the room? Ever had that experience? So they say that there's something that happens in the human brain that when you cross a threshold, it does cause the brain to disassociate from whatever was going on in the other room. And that's why it's difficult to bring with us the thing that we remembered before we walked into the room. Now, it's whatever that might be is exaggerated when the threshold that we're crossing is the threshold out of shul. As long as we're in shul, we're committed. Whatever the rabbi said makes so much sense. What we've just davened spoke to the depths of our soul. We're feeling elated, we're feeling inspired, we're feeling connected, and then we cross the threshold of the shul, something happens, and we have this experience of amnesia. Now, the Beinoni is starting at a much higher level during prayer than we are, yet after the prayer, as we started to learn last week, after the prayers are over, that high dissolves, which means that the Beinoni is once again susceptible to the influence, or at least the attempted influence, of the negative side of their personality, what we call the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, or what people will call the Yetzer Hara, the so-called evil inclination. So the bulletproof protection of prayer dissipates after the prayer, and there is the Nefesh HaBahamis knocking on the door saying, come on, let's have a good time, let's go out and do things that are enjoyable and that are personally, uplifting. Self-interest. Now, we analyzed last time that the reason that this happens is because the Beinoni has mastery over what we call levushim, the garments of the experience. In other words, the Beinoni has mastery over the thought process, over words, and over action. But the Beinoni has not yet unseated the Nefesh HaBahamis. In other words, the key distinction between a tzaddik, which is the ultimate spiritual state, and a Beinoni, which is our aspirational spiritual state, the key difference is that in the tzaddik's reality, the Nefesh HaBahamis, the wayward soul, the self-interested part, no longer has a voice. In what we call the imperfect tzaddik, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the animal soul, whatever you want to call it, has effectively been tucked away into a safe corner and is quarantined and cannot affect him. And in the case of the perfect tzaddik, the Nefesh HaBahamis has joined the team and is now fighting for the right cause. The Benoni doesn't have that luxury. As far as the Benoni is concerned, my house is safe, but criminals still roam the streets. In other words, in the Benoni's reality, the Benoni knows how to control inappropriate thoughts and how to keep his mouth shut when it's not appropriate and how to behave in accordance with what the Torah wants. He knows how to do all of that. But the threat remains. There's an animal soul that still cares about animalistic things, that is badgering to say, no, come on, come along for the ride. So the question that we have to deal with this evening is we have to say, okay, so if the Benoni is constantly under pressure, and we all know what that's like, we all have experiences in our own lives where there's external pressure and the pressure doesn't go away and eventually it wears us down and sometimes we give in to that pressure because it becomes insurmountable. So how does the Benoni stay strong? What's the Benoni's secret? And we're going to speak primarily from this evening, which is going to be the second last segment of the chapter. We're going to speak about how the Benoni deals with behaviors and thoughts. Thoughts are going to be a very big conversation. And then in the final part of the chapter, we're going to talk about how the Benoni deals with difficult people. and sometimes that might be the part that we're more interested in, because we don't ever consider the fact that we have a difficult person that lives in our own heads. So it's that difficult person. Okay, so that's what we're going to have to be looking at this evening. And the primary focus of this evening's conversation is how to keep the mind healthy. Because think about it. If the wrong things get into our heads, that will have a cascading effect on every other part of us. So if our thoughts are not healthy, we can anticipate that our emotions will be unhealthy. We can anticipate that we won't have the capacity then to speak appropriately, and the likelihood is we'll do things we shouldn't do. So what sits at the core of real shift and real growth is getting our heads right. So this evening we're going to speak about the secrets of mind power that you could learn from the Benoni's experience. We're going to be doing a description of the Benoni and hopefully taking a leaf out of that book to apply in our own lives to possibly get a bit better at mind control. I don't like the word mind control because it sounds like there's some nefarious person who's trying to get into our heads. But I think you understand what I'm saying over here. Mind control meaning mind self-control. All right, so let's have a look. Where are we? If you have the book on page 52, we're going to go, you know what? Let's go right from the top of the page, from the, it's going to be the second last line of the, second last word of the last line. And let's go back just to line that up over here on the screen. Ki'ilu lo yispalel klal, nu, where is it? Sorry, I'm not aligning the screen and the book so easily. Just give me 1 second. I'll show you where it is on the book. There it is. Ki'ilu lo yispalel klal. There. Do you see where it is? So if you're looking on the screen, it's the fourth line on the screen, and it's the second last word of that line. Okay, so what do we say? That it is quite possible that after the Benoni has had this incredibly almost otherworldly spiritual experience during prayer, where Hashem is clear and a reality that is overwhelmingly true, and therefore the Benoni feels this powerful love towards Hashem and no distraction. Yet after the person finishes their prayers, there comes the Nefesh HaBahamis and starts seeding inappropriate temptations. Ke'ilu loy hispalel klal. And the effects are so profound that it's like you had never davened. It's like the Benoni had never had that deeply meditative, spiritually enhancing experience, because the Nefesh HaBahamis is still using that same crass language and suggesting those same debased behaviors. And you think to yourself, am I a failure? I'm speaking Benoni language now, right? So the Benoni says, am I a failure? I spent time, I focused my mind, I meditated on the prayers, I had a shift in terms of my emotional connection, everything lined up. And as soon as I finish and I walk outside, I still have such inappropriate thoughts cascading through my head. How's that happen? Ki'ilu lo hispalel klal. It's as if there had been no prayer at all. It's as if nothing had shifted. And yet, here's the key thing about what distinguishes the Beinoni from us, because we also have these moments. We also have these moments of self-disappointment. I was feeling so inspired, and I felt so connected, and I felt a shift, and then it just dissolves into the background in no time. So what distinguishes the Beinoni from us? Well, what distinguishes the Beinoni is that Elo should be Devar Isur, if the Beinoni's Nefesh Abahamis would like to suggest anything inappropriate, then Eino Oila Bedaitoi La Asois HaIsur Befoil Mamesh Chas V'Shalom. This is a big distinction between the experience of an ordinary person and the experience of a Beinoni. Page 52. So we're on the Simcha circuit over here. So we have Mazel Tov to Hilton also. Also a new baby in the family. So, okay, so what do we say? That loy eina oile bedaitoi la seisa yisa befil mamash chas v'shalom. The kind of distracting thoughts that the Beinoni has are really different to the kinds of distracting thoughts that ordinary people have. How so? Because the Beinoni has the inappropriate thought without ever considering actually doing something about it. So let's use an example or two that we could relate to. Let's say, and I don't know why we always default to this example, possibly because it's ubiquitous and possibly because it's something that is spoken about so much in Jewish literature. So let's say there's a group of people sitting together. Let's say, I don't know, it's a Friday night Shabbos table. We all know what happens at Friday night Shabbos tables, right? We solve all of the world's problems. Just put us all around the table. I'm absolutely convinced if we could take the world leaders and offer them two tools, one a Shabbos table and the other to daven the Amidah every single day, between the two, they would resolve every problem in the world. Because we do. Every time we daven the Amidah, we have brainwaves that nobody else has ever experienced. And when we sit around the table on Shabbos, we resolve the world's issues. So there are people sitting at a Friday night table, at a Shabbos table, and they're talking about whatever it is that they're talking about. And unfortunately, what very often happens when people sit around the table is they end up talking about other people. The following suggestion is not endorsed by this shiur, so we do not recommend that this is what you should be doing. But it's what happens. People speak about people. And unfortunately, sometimes when people speak about people, it's not flattering, it's not complimentary. Sometimes when we speak about people, we speak about the darker side of people. Did you hear? Did you hear what happened to so-and-so? Obviously, I'm not speaking Lashon Hara. I'm just giving you information that you need to know because it's really important. We have all these rationalizations for why we should speak about people in a negative fashion. So now, it's possible, and hopefully we've all had this experience, where the thought enters our minds to say, ooh, I've got a great piece of juicy gossip that I'm going to share with the table. And then another thought, that's not the part that I say, hopefully it happened to us. Hopefully what happens to us is the next thought that follows, which is, that's not appropriate, that's Lashon Hara, don't say it. And then we don't. We actually stop ourselves from speaking negatively about somebody else. Is that what you'd call a success story? Of course, that's a success story. In our world, that's a success story. Because nobody knows what went on in my mind. And the reality is that there was a temptation, and I withstood the temptation, and the net outcome is I didn't speak badly about somebody else. That's good. That's great. That's amazing. For us, that would be a good ending to the story. For the Beinoni, it's not good enough. In other words, a tzaddik would never have the thought in the first place. So if you have a tzaddik sitting at your table, you can be absolutely guaranteed that it does not ever cross their mind that maybe they should share a piece of gossip. It's not going to happen. It doesn't exist. The motivation, the part of the psyche that precipitates wanting to speak badly about other people does not exist in the tzaddik. Doesn't exist. So they don't have the internal struggle to say, I don't want to speak badly. So they're the two extremes. We, who probably some of the time say stories that we shouldn't say, and some of the time we shut ourselves down and we don't share Lashon Hara. The tzaddik on the other extreme, who never has that temptation. It's not part and parcel of their reality. Where does the Beinoni sit? In a very unique place. The Beinoni sits in a place where the story might cross their mind. X happened to so-and-so, or so-and-so did such and such. The story crosses their mind, but the thought that they should share the story doesn't. Again, in our experience, the thought crosses our mind. The feeling that we should share the story crosses our mind. And sometimes we are on top of our game and we don't share the story. In the tzaddik's world, the story doesn't cross their mind. They don't think negatively about somebody. The Beinoni, the information flashes on the screen, but the link between that information and sharing the information doesn't happen. So let's read it again. So what is it? Eino oile bedaite. It doesn't enter the Beinoni's mind. La asois ha'isur b'foyel mamash, to actually perform the forbidden activity. Let's use another example. Let's say that a person spent certain years of their life not observing Judaism. And as a result, they used to eat a particular kind of food that was not kosher. Or they used to frequent a particular restaurant that's not a kosher restaurant. One day, they're walking past what used to be their favorite restaurant before they started to keep kosher. And they smell their favorite dish, dafka, as they're walking past the restaurant. That's the aroma that wafts out of the restaurant. Their favorite meal from, those days. So if it was a tzaddik walking past the restaurant and the aroma coming out of the restaurant was not kosher, the tzaddik's processing of smell would not present as an attractive smell. That's how advanced the tzaddik is. It's hard for us to imagine. For us, it smells good, but we're not allowed to have it. For the tzaddik, it wouldn't even be an interesting smell. It wouldn't even attract him. Because the tzaddik is so immune to things that are misaligned from the Torah, that if it's misaligned from the Torah, his body doesn't take it in. It's a fascinating thought to imagine. The person who used to eat non-kosher walks past and thinks, do I remember that dish? It used to be so geschmack. And they could think one of two things. Either they could think, I wish synthetically they'd make a kosher version. Or they think, you know how nice it would be just to have that again. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to eat the food. But the thought that links it to potential action, it would be nice to have that again. The Beinoni wouldn't have that thought. The Beinoni might have the thought, that smells nice. Non-kosher food is attractive. That thought could cross the Beinoni's mind. But the thought that I would like to have some, the Beinoni's graduated beyond that. One final example, just to consolidate. So, has this ever happened? I'm sure it has. I know it's happened to people I'm very close to, let's put it that way, right? Somebody I know told me about their brother-in-law's friend's cousin. So it's Shabbos. And you walk into a room that is dark on Shabbos. Now there's a few different reactions. So the one that's probably happened to many of us is, you don't realize, you forget, you're distracted, flip the switch. So we all know that there's no liability for that. You're not going to be punished for flipping the switch. It's what we call misasek, where a person does something without paying it any attention, and they're not liable. So could that happen to us? Yes, it could. Could it happen to us that we walk into a room and the circumstances are such, let's reverse the story for a second. Let's say that somebody left the light on in the bedroom, and you're one of those people who can't sleep with the light on. And there's only one bedroom in your apartment. Now what are you going to do? Is it possible that the thought flashes across the mind to say, you know what? What if I accidentally, with my elbow, happen to switch off the light? The thought could cross our mind. I'm not saying we'd do it, but the thought could cross our minds. Now let's compare to the tzaddik. Can it happen to the tzaddik? No. Does the tzaddik ever inadvertently flip the switch on the light on Shabbos? No, it's not possible. The tzaddik's body is so aligned with the principles of what Hashem wants that his body would not react to a light switch on a Shabbos. Cannot happen. Could we maybe somehow convince ourselves that there's a mitzvah to sleep on Shabbos, and therefore if I do it in an direct fashion, it's maybe I could just elbow the light? It's possible. Could happen to us. The Beinoni walks into the room. And the Beinoni says, I cannot sleep with the light on. And there is the possibility that lights could be turned off. But they never think, I would or could potentially turn off the light on Shabbos. So that's what we're saying. As much as the Beinoni now feels the distractions and the temptations of the Nefesh HaBahamis of the animal soul after the prayer service is over, it's just noise. It doesn't reach the threshold of translating into action. So then what does the Nefesh HaBahamis achieve? Let's think about it. If you knew a Nefesh HaBahamis, let's say that you had an old friend who was a Nefesh HaBahamis, an animal soul, you'd ask them, what are you wasting your time with this Beinoni? He's never going to respond. You know, you've tried this already for many years. You've tried this suggestion, you've tried that suggestion, you've knocked on the door, and nothing's happening. Why are you trying? So therefore, the Alter Rebbe continues, Elo hirhure aveira hakoshim me aveira. This is a quotation from the Gemara. And the Gemara says that thoughts around sin are in a certain sense worse or more difficult than sin itself. What does that mean? What does that mean? Let's just think for a moment. What does that mean? So I'm pretty certain I've shared this story before, but I'm going to share it again because it's relevant here. The story of these two religious Jewish men who are walking along in Amsterdam. They're walking along the canal. Remember the story? And they're walking along the canal, and they see that there's a woman who's fallen into the water and she's drowning. So the one guy with the long beard and the payas and the tzitzis and the whole thing dives into the water, yanks this woman out, and saves her life. 10 minutes later, they're who knows how far down the side of the channel, and the other guy, who's still bone dry, turns to this fellow and he says, I cannot believe you jumped into the water and you saved a woman. You're a frum Jew. How could you touch another woman? So the guy who saved the woman's life says to him, that's the difference between you and I. I jumped into the water and I spent a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it was, schlepping that woman out of the water, and then I left her there on the side of the canal. You are still carrying her with you. Hirhure avera akoshim me avera. The thoughts surrounding sin are sometimes more difficult to deal with than the sin itself. I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. I didn't see the question earlier, so I'm just going to address the question quickly. What if you smell the tempting non-kosher smell and you decide to recreate it in a kosher version? There's a very interesting Gemara, I believe it's in Chulin, where the Gemara says that whatever Hashem created that is forbidden for us, He created an alternative that is permitted to us. And so therefore, if the person feels that the correct thing to do is to create a kosher version, that would be very much aligned with what the Torah expects of us. Because that firstly recognizes the fact that whatever Hashem put out there, He made alternatives that we can access, and it would allow people to have that opportunity to replicate what they really want with something else. Okay, and then of course I'm sure we can get into a whole conversation now about lab-grown meat and all that kind of stuff, which we'll leave for another conversation, another time, probably another rabbi. Okay, so coming back, Hirhure Avera Akoshim Avera, the thoughts surrounding sin or the thoughts regarding sin are more difficult than sin itself, meaning, this is a very controversial thing to say, so you've got to take it with a healthy pinch of salt, but I'm just stretching a point to make a point. So please don't quote this out of context and don't use it as license. Sometimes doing what's wrong has less spiritual damage than ruminating, overdoing what's wrong. Now, that's not license to do something wrong. Let's be clear. But there are two ways in which doing the wrong thing is better than thinking the wrong thing. The first way is it kind of hits the wall. You know, when they speak about people who battling addiction and how they've got to hit rock bottom before they can actually begin their recovery, it's a similar kind of thing. Sometimes the person has to actually have done something wrong so that they can deal with it. So they can own up to it, they can do teshuvah for it. And until the person reaches that point, it's not so black and white that they cross the line and that they have to fix things. Which brings us really to the second point, and that is, and the Rambam writes this in the context of inappropriate relationships. And he says that the Torah forbade various kinds of relationships, but in addition to the fact that the Torah forbade outright various relationships, we have to be conscious of the fact that even thinking about the possibility of those relationships is a big problem. And the Rambam goes so far as to say that it's something that becomes very difficult for a person to do teshuvah for. Why? Because he says, I didn't touch anybody. I didn't cross any lines. I didn't betray anybody. I just thought about something. Although the Rambam there also speaks about looking where a person shouldn't look. But it's the same principle. So as long as a person can justify to themselves that they haven't... Okay, there, I think we lost signal there for a second. As long as a person can justify to themselves that they haven't actually done something wrong, it perpetuates. So here, Hure Avera, the thoughts surrounding or the thoughts related to sins, says the Talmud, are more difficult to manage than the sins themselves. Again, going back to our question, so we're interviewing this Nefesh HaBahamis, and we're saying, what value are you getting out of persisting with these thoughts in the case of a Beinoni when you know that the Beinoni is not going to respond and not going to behave in kind? Read on. Because when the wrong thoughts are spinning around in our heads, then we don't have the headspace for the right things that we should focus on, like Torah study or avodah, which represents very meaningful prayer. And it's easy to prove this, by the way. It's easy to prove this. Speak to anybody who has ever tried to have a focused, meditative prayer experience, and they will all share the same experience, which is, I don't know what happens to me. As soon as I try to concentrate on the davening, as soon as I try and focus on the prayers, my mind goes wild. I don't only think about laundry lists and shopping lists and who I was supposed to call and should I invite this one for Shabbos, although all of that does happen. I also sometimes have the most ridiculous suggestions that pop into my head. And I start wondering, how could it be? How come it is that when I'm sitting at work in front of a computer or with a client or reading a book or cycling, I don't have these crazy thoughts that seem to be so left field, that seem to, in a sense, expose how weak my spirituality is. But sit in shul and daven, the most horrible thoughts come into my mind. Why? Because the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, whose goal and objective is to block, to stunt our spiritual development will throw anything it can at us to do that. So if all it's going to do is make a lot of noise in our head so that our head cannot be filled with meaningful stuff, it will claim a victory. I managed to get into your head. I managed to hack you about things that you'll never do, but at least now you're thinking about those things. Okamaymer Azal, and that is similar to another statement in the Talmud, that Gimel Averos Ein Adam Nitzal Mehen B'chol Yoim. There are 3 sins that the average person cannot avoid on a daily basis. Now, out of the 3, the Alter Rebbe will only quote the 2 that are directly relevant to our conversation right here, which is Hirhur Aveira, thoughts of sin or related to sin, Ve'iyun Tfilah Chulei, and focus on prayer. Now you can see how the 2 go hand in hand, right? Because when a person can't really avoid those inappropriate thoughts cascading through their head, that's going to interfere with their ability to focus on prayer. Okay, interesting question. The question is, so in a sense, the animal soul aligns with the Yetzer Hara to work against us. That's a very interesting, very important question. So let's back up for a second and just redefine again, because occasionally we tend to blur the lines over here. So let's redefine again. What is the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, and what is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination? The Nefesh HaBahamis is an entity that is part of our spiritual makeup. And that's why it's called a soul. It's an animal soul, but it's a soul. It's a soul in the sense that its purpose is to keep the body alive and to ensure that the human being in which it lives is a successful human being. So the Nefesh HaBahamis is responsible for a whole lot of very positive elements of our lives. Survival, ambition, looking for enjoyment in life, which is quite important in certain areas of life. If there was an absence of enjoyment, there's certain things we would never do, we'd never have children, etc. But the animal soul is in and of itself neutral, which means that the animal soul, like an animal, is not necessarily bad. And it depends very much on who owns or directs or trains the animal, what the animal's going to do. So, for example, lions kill buck in order to eat. Are they bad? They're not bad. That's what they were designed to do. That's how Hashem made lions. Hashem decided that they were going to be predators. There's no value judgment on a lion being a predator. That's how they were designed. If a person, I don't know why it would be necessary to do this, but let's just say, if a person would train a lion to behave in a way that is beneficial to humans, great. That's a value for us. I'm not saying that's something we should do. There are other animals that we do specifically train, whether it be dogs, non-kosher, whether it be oxen, kosher, right? Animals that were used, trained by human beings in order to give a value to society. Now, let's say a bull, right? A bull is it a bad animal? No, it's not a bad animal. It's an animal. Animals are neutral. Is a bull an animal that you want like the cliche of the bull in the china shop? Is a bull an animal that you want in a place where things are fragile? No, not because the bull is malicious, just because it's an animal, and animals don't appreciate the value of fine china. If I can master the bull, then it could become a great asset. So it could pull a plow, or it could, in the old days when they used to use them to pull the millstones to be able to crush wheat into flour, and so forth. So the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, is like an animal. It is not bad. It's neutral. And it follows its natural instincts. Now, like anything else in life, there are influences that come to play in that environment. So the Yetzer Hara is a toxic thought process that is aligned with the Nefesh HaBahamis, meaning to say the animal soul is predisposed to that kind of influence. Yetzer Hara means an inclination to something that is bad, a leaning to something that is bad. So yes, if the Yetzer Hara infects or influences the Nefesh HaBahamis, then they would together be, so to speak, I don't like to use the word partnership, but they'd be two forces for us to contend with. Okay, I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully that makes it a bit clearer. Okay, so going back to what the Gemara said, that there are three types of Avera that a person never avoids on a daily basis. Like I say, the Alter Rebbe will focus on the two that are relevant to us, and they are Hirhure Avera, that there is nobody outside of the world of the tzaddik who is capable of never having thoughts that are associated with inappropriate behavior. And Iyun Tefillah, again, outside of the world of the tzaddik, there is nobody who is able to focus from start to finish on the prayers with absolute focus and no distraction at all. But here's the key part of what we have to learn tonight. So there's this constant assailing of the Beinoni by the animal soul, by the Yetzer Hara, trying to distract it. So how is it then that the Beinoni has the resilience every single day to deal with this hammering in its head, constantly think about this Avera, think about that Avera, think about that Avera? How come it never translates not only into action, not only into expression, but not even into thought? How? Where does that resilience come from? Rak, he continues, Shelazem mo'il, what assists the Beinoni to be able to overcome this is harashim u'bemoichin, a little bit of a so-called intellectual hangover. The hangover always has a negative connotation, but over here we mean like a residue, a residual awareness. So during the course of the prayers, they have a very developed, focused, intellectual appreciation of godliness, and after the prayers are over, there's a residual awareness. Ve'yiras Hashem ve'ahavosoi, as well as a natural awe of Hashem and a love of Hashem, ha'mesuseres bechol olam yemoni, which are hidden in the right-hand side of the heart. Remember in chapter 9, we described that the heart, which is the seat of emotion, could express in two ways, which we call the right side, which is the healthier, aspirational side of emotion, or the left side, which is the less healthy, self-interested side of emotion that aligns with negativity. So we have now introduced two concepts that we're only really going to explain properly in chapter 18, 19. We'll come back to these two concepts and really unpack them. Ahava and Yira, love and fear of Hashem, ha'mesuseres, which are hidden within us. For now, we'll just keep it simple, and we'll say that as a result of the Beinoni having such a focused, high-level experience of prayer, so that elevates and sensitizes the Beinoni so that the mind is sharper to spiritual things and the heart is more open and awake to aligning with Hashem. But it's what we call Ahava Mesuseres. It's still a hidden love, and we'll describe why that is much later. What that means is that Lehisgaber, he has the power to overcome, Lishloit, and to dominate Al Hora Hazeh, over this negativity, HaMis'ave Taiva, which is generating these inappropriate desires. How much dominion does the Beinoni have? That these negative forces should never get to have any dominion in the miniature city. Remember, in chapter 9, we defined the human experience, the human body, as a miniature city that is constantly under attack of these two different kings, the neshama on the one hand and the animal soul on the other hand, vying for control. Well, the Beinoni never allows that control. The Beinoni never allows the negative feelings and temptations to translate into reality. Lehislabesh be'evrei haguf, to seep down into the limbs of the body. We don't think about it this way, but any thought that a person has to somehow drift down into the actual body in order for the person to act in accordance with those thoughts. The Beinoni is never allowing that to happen in negative behaviors. Not only that, the Beinoni doesn't even allow the thoughts that's literally ticker tape across the screen, doesn't allow them to settle. To think about negative things. Because listen to the next key words, the Beinoni will never willingly entertain inappropriate thoughts. To ever willingly embrace this negative thought that the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, has recommended. And even though it's a spontaneous expression, these thoughts just kind of spontaneously pop into the head, the Beinoni recognizes that, activates the virus where, and doesn't allow the thought airtime. As soon as the thought manifests in the brain of the Beinoni, he pushes that thought out with both hands. The implication obviously meaning that it's absolute, non-negotiable, as the Nancy Reagan slogan was, just say no. And he changes channels in his brain. The second he becomes aware that this is not an appropriate thought. That is the unique selling point of the Beinoni. The capacity to be able to identify this is a toxic thought, shut it down. We don't. These thoughts come into our minds and we say, is it a toxic thought? Maybe I have a reason why I should behave this way. Maybe these particular circumstances require it. So we're not so absolute in our decision making. We have cracks in our protection. The Beinoni is laser focused. The minute the Beinoni becomes conscious of what thought just popped into my mind, he says, oh no, out you go. And we get introduced over here to a really powerful concept called Hesach HaDa'as. Hesach HaDa'as is a concept the Alter Rebbe speaks about over here. The Rebbe includes it in dozens of letters to people, helping them to deal with all kinds of inappropriate or negative or self-defeating thoughts. Hesach HaDa'as is a fundamental belief that we have the capacity to change channels in our brain. Just because this is the thought that's in my mind right now does not mean it has to be the thought which is in my mind in 3 seconds from now. That is what human greatness is. The ability to choose where we focus. The ability to excise inappropriate thoughts out of our minds and replace them with something else. That's what the Beinoni has down pat. That thought doesn't have enough time to ferment. And of course, if the thought cannot develop, then the thought will never translate into behavior. So the kol shekain. So, sorry, let's go back a bit. When we say that the Beinoni doesn't willingly accept or embrace this thought, that means that the Beinoni won't allow himself even the thought, not the thought of I should behave a certain way, just the thought of that story about that guy. No, get the thought out of my head, because that thought could soon enough become, maybe I should tell the story. And it goes without saying that the Beinoni would never entertain translating that thought into potential action. He wouldn't even entertain talking about it. Because any person who willingly embraces an inappropriate thought, is defined in that moment as a rasha. And as we've already said multiple times, a Beinoni is never a rasha, not even for a moment. That should illustrate to us how advanced the Beinoni is. There's a story about a particular individual who came to the Maggid of Mesrich, who was the teacher of the Alter Rebbe, the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, and he said to him, I need to learn how to control inappropriate thoughts, especially when I'm trying to pray. There's always inappropriate thoughts that are coming to my head. So the Maggid of Mesrich said, well, if you want to know how to control inappropriate thoughts, I'm unable to help you. But if you go to this shtetl and you go to a particular chassid, he'll be able to show you how to control inappropriate thoughts. But you have to leave right now. Okay? So the chassid immediately catches the first wagon out of town. He heads over to that shtetl. Took him a number of hours to get there. By the time he arrives there, it's already late at night. But he had the address of this particular person he was supposed to go see. It was another chassid. And he was very gratified to discover that he got there, even though it was late at night. There was a light on. This fellow was sitting and learning. He could see through the window that he's sitting and learning at his desk. So he knocks on the door. It was quite cold outside. We're talking over here about Russia. He knocks on the door. Nothing. No response. He knocks a little louder. No response. He calls the chassid's name. He knocks on the window. Nothing. For 20 minutes he's banging and clapping and this and that and whatever. No response. Eventually he's freezing cold. And he had to find a place to warm up and to sleep for the night. So he had no choice. And he slept on a bench in the shul. The following morning, he goes over to the same chassid's house, knocks on the door. The chassid throws the door open. Shalom aleichem. Welcome. Thank you for coming. He says, can I give you some breakfast? Can I give you some coffee? I don't know exactly what he offered him. Eventually he says, what brings you to town? So the fellow says to him, the Maggid of Mezrich said that I should come find out from you, how do you handle inappropriate thoughts? I said, that I already showed you last night. And that's the story of the Beinoni. You can bang and you can scream and you could shout and you could, I'm not interested. These are inappropriate thoughts. They don't have a place in my head. That's the attitude of the Beinoni. Little pro tip, it's not always so easy just to switch channels, right? It's like telling a person, don't think about a pink elephant, and now all they think about is a pink elephant. So when you tell somebody, don't think about that inappropriate thought, the brain doesn't hear negative, so you start thinking about the inappropriate thought. Pro tip, the Rebbe advised people that you should learn pieces of Torah by heart, Mishnah, Tanya, some people even commit Tehillim to memory. The minute there's an inappropriate thought, you've got stock ready to switch channels to. So I don't know what I'm supposed to think about, so I'm just going to start saying those words of Torah that I've memorized, and that will switch the channel. And although we may not be Beinonim, and perhaps not even close yet, but at least one method that is universal is to learn a method to say, I can change the chatter that is going on in my brain. And the impact of that is immense.